here we go. So I was given this question yesterday: can I be love addicted to a partner that isn't abusive? And actually, you can. You just don't have the intermittent reinforcement component. What you're actually dealing with is a strong sense of unmet need being met, and then your undeveloped sense of personal identity is getting in the way. So chronically in codependency is a form of neglect, and I call this reference neglect or identity neglect. And I'm going to put the phone over here so it stops doing that. And what this does is, in child development, we learn who we are based on a reflection we're getting from people we interact with that we trust, typically our parents or trusted caretakers. And when that reflection is either chronically negative or non-existent, we struggle to differentiate ourselves and become aware of who we are in contrast or relationship to these other people. And what this ends up doing is it leaves us half-formed. So we don't really know who we are. We don't really know what our value is. We don't know what our priorities are. We don't know our boundaries. We don't know us as a person. And this leads us to seeking ourselves through other people. And codependents that pair bond or have relationships with semi-healthy or healthy people are stuck in this growth pattern. They're seeking a sense of themselves through the feedback that their partner gives them. And so their partner gives them a strong boost of value and self-respect, self-esteem. And that person, the codependent, is reliant on the feedback of their partner to nourish, nurture, and bring that awareness to them. Basically, it gives them permission to be that way. This is the same function that's going on in a trauma, in a narcissistic to codependent or toxic person to codependent relationship, sans the chaos and chemistry up and down that's created by the intermittent reinforcement. This doesn't mean that if and when that relationship between the codependent and healthy person breaks down or ends, they're not going to go through a very similar experience of dopamine withdrawal and identity loss and value collapse, because they will. Because the fundamental problem still exists in that their identity is embedded or enmeshed in the other person. So this is why the happiness strategy is completely focused on returning our value back to us, because when our sense of value is returned back to our mental and emotional state, and then it'll show up in our behavioral state, then we don't depend on people to define us. Instead, we're looking at the relationship through the lens of our value, and we can determine if that person actually belongs in our life or not, because we have an independent sense of identity from them. And that identity is formed through our awareness and embodiment and practice of that value. Because when we embody the value, the voice of that value comes alive. That's where we hear ourselves. And from that voice, we see or gain a vision of who we are. And boom, that's how we develop identity. That's it. This solves the problem with codependency, because codependency is a survival strategy for dealing with the discard trauma that's a result of what's called the consumer supply relationship or transactional relationships. And in transactional relationships, we lose our identity so that we can become who we think they want us to be, so they'll keep us. So we don't have to be discarded. See how that works? So the value, voice, and vision system in the happiness strategy reverses that process and ends our need to be codependent, because we know our value, we know our voice, we know who we are through our vision, and we can follow it. But fundamentally, yes, if you're a codependent that's been in a relationship with someone who is semi-healthy, maybe they're codependent too, or they're actually healthy, and that relationship ends, you're going to go through an identity disruption. In fact, most people experience this once or twice in their life, usually in their teens, where they feel like they've met that love of their life. It's the only person they'll ever love. And then they go through a breakup and they can't understand why that person doesn't love them anymore. And they go through that deep period. And then they come out of it into this emergence of awareness about who they are beyond that relationship. Hi, Trish. Very happy to have you here. So this is what's going on with this. It's a very, very important component. So if you're dealing with love addiction, you're dealing with trauma bonding, you're dealing with a lack of identity, value, voice, and vision for yourself, and we heal that. Now the big challenge with love addiction or with trauma bonding is the chemical withdrawal, because you will go through a dopamine withdrawal. You'll go through an oxytocin, serotonin withdrawal, because you no longer have the stimulus outside of yourself to trigger the brain to create that. You also go through, especially if it's a trauma bond, the adrenal withdrawal, because you get hooked on your adrenaline, your cortisol. That's normal. That's understandable. It's an awful experience, but if you stick it through, and it can take some time, but if you stick it through and you stay rooted in your value, return back to your value, back to trusting your awareness about your sense of the relationship and who they really are, trusting your pain, especially if you're dealing with a true trauma bond, you've been in a traumatic relationship with a narcissistic or abusive person, you trust that. Don't trust your fantasy. And even in the breakdowns between semi-healthy or healthy people, we all have a fantasy about who we think this person's going to be for us. And then we can become really sober about it. Don't trust your fantasy. Trust reality. And reality is determined by patterns of behavior. Broken record on that. You can know a person based on their patterns of behavior. You can know whether they are healthy or not, and whether they line up with your values or not, so you can make an honest choice about the relationship in your life, because that's how we proactively choose people in our lives. Whereas with codependency, it's a reactive system, right? So you'll take whoever shows up, especially if they love bomb you, and you're right in with it. But in a proactive system, love bombing is actually a red flag. You're like, this is odd. Why are they escalating this? Why are they saying these things so fast? That kind of thing. So guys, I want you to think about that. If you're going through a breakup, yes, you can actually have some love addiction with healthy bonded people, because you have the unmatured sense of identity still to grow out and develop within you. But that is healable. It's not even technically healing, it's maturing. You mature into more of who you are emotionally and relationally. So if you want help with that, that's what the happiness strategy helps you accomplish, is returning back to your value, knowing your voice, knowing your vision, so that you can have a life of happiness based on what drives you in your life and what motivates you from your sense of worth and value. So if you struggle to get past codependency in therapy, struggling with your self-help efforts, you still feel like you're not worth it as a human being, you're still stuck in that love or transactional love, earning love, then the happiness system is developed. The happiness strategy is developed just for you. So you can apply for that. We have 14 seats available. We start January 20th, 2020. The link to apply is above. It's ths.freetheself.com. And if you're on YouTube, it's below in the information segment. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you. And remember that you're worth knowing, loving, and keeping. And have a great day. Okay, guys. Bye-bye.